Welcome to this tutorial about recording objects onto the PAS database. In this training video, we'll look at each field on the database and talk about what you should enter into them. We'll go through in the order that you have to complete each section. The aim of the training is to ensure consistency across database records and to make sure your records are searchable. This is important because if the data can't be found, then it cannot be used for research. The PAS database can be found at www.finds.org.uk under the Database tab. This training video assumes that you already have a database account and have been approved for recording by your local Finds liaison officer. If not, please register for an account before continuing to watch the video. Records on the database can be viewed without logging in, but if you want to create a database record, you will need to log in. The Login button is in the top left corner of the screen, just below the PAS logo. This is also where you can register for a new database account. On the next screen, complete your details and press the Login button. This will bring up your user account details page. To create a new database record from this page, look for the Add New Object link in the list underneath your user details. If you are elsewhere in the database and would like to create a new record, look for the Finds Recorded by Me link in the sidebar on the left of your screen, and then click the Add New Artifact button, which is a green button near the top of the New screen. Whichever method you use to start your new record, you will open a blank data entry form. In order to create a basic skeleton record, there's a minimum amount of information you must provide. You must enter an object type, a broad period, and the period from and period to. You can then save the record. This means that you don't have to start and finish a record all in one go. You can save it and come back to it later. So, let's begin creating our record by filling in the object details. The first box to fill in is the object type. You can't type just anything into this box. You have to use a term from the MDA Object Type Thesaurus. This is a list of object types agreed by relevant heritage bodies such as Historic England, and it ensures that the data is consistent across archaeological organisations. You can find a full list of permitted terms by scrolling to the bottom of any of our web pages and clicking the Controlled Vocabulary link, but there is an easier way. Simply start typing in the box and a list of suggestions will appear, and you can choose the correct term. If you try to use an incorrect term, you will get an error message in red. For more guidance on what terms to use, you can check out our Finds recording guides, which will tell you exactly what terms to use in the object type and classification fields. Please note that if your object type is a coin, jeton or token, you will need to complete some extra forms. These will be covered in other videos. The object type certainty describes how sure you are about your identification. This field defaults to certain. If you are more than 50% certain but less than 100%, then use probably instead. Possibly is less than 50% certain, but we discourage the use of this category. At this point, it would instead be better to use unidentified object in object type, rather than to guess what the object is. Otherwise, it could lead to what we call false positives in the data, which can be frustrating for researchers. Some object types can be further divided into classifications and subclassifications, particularly where they've been researched extensively and recognised typologies have been created. For example, brooches is a huge category of finds, so classifications and subclassifications are very important to include. Again, guidance on which to use can be found in our fines recording guides. You can also ask your fines liaison officer for advice. The object description is the most important field of all, and we have a separate video that covers how to write a good object description. The key thing to remember is that this field is for telling us what the object looks like, not just what it is. Put all of the information about the object into this field, even if it means duplicating information that you've entered elsewhere, such as materials and dimensions. The idea is to give a full description of the object. Please remember not to badmouth anyone or write something rude or offensive in this field. Also, don't enter confidential or sensitive information into this field, such as finder or landowner details or Findspot information. This information should not be publicly accessible, and there are special fields for this information that are designed to protect it and keep it safe. The notes field should only be used for information that cannot go anywhere else. Most information should have a specific field in which it should be entered, but occasionally you will have some information that doesn't fit, in which case you can put it here. For example, details of conservation treatments. This field should never contain any confidential or sensitive information. If in doubt about where to put a piece of information, check with your fines liaison officer. The inscription field is for recording details of any writing on your object. You must fill in this field if your object has lettering on it, even though you will have described the lettering in your object description. Otherwise, your object may not show up when people are searching for objects with inscriptions on them. However, do not use this field for coins, as there is a separate field on the coin recording form for this information. The Find of Note fields are for highlighting archaeologically significant objects. There's no specific criteria for this field, as it's highly variable, but try to use it sparingly. It's generally about what is out of ordinary for an area or type of find. So, if something was the first example of its kind from a particular area, you might tick the box, or if it was an unusual example of something. There's a drop-down box that you can use to qualify why it is important. As always, you can check with your fines liaison officer first. These fields are where information for treasure cases is recorded. You will generally not need to use these fields, as treasure cases are dealt with by the fines liaison officers and the treasure team at the British Museum. The next section of the form is all about the periods and dates in which the object was made and used. The broad period field is a key field that must be filled in before you can save a record. You must fill in both fields, even if the period from and the period to are the same. There's a drop-down list of the broad periods that we use on the database. The date ranges for each of these periods is shown here on the right. For each broad period, you'll need to indicate how certain you are of the date. The record defaults to certain. Probably indicates that you are more than 50% certain, possibly indicates that you are less than 50% certain. For some periods, it's important to provide a sub-period from and to, particularly for the prehistoric and early medieval periods. Date ranges for the sub-periods are shown here on the right. The date from and date to fields are key fields that must be completed before a record can be saved. These fields are where the precise dates for an object are entered, and we're talking about the date of manufacture here. If you have an object with a single precise date, such as a coin, then enter the same year into each field. Enter the year as digits, not words. For BC dates, you must enter a minus before the number, with no space in between, otherwise it will default to an AD date. There are two options for date certainty here. The database defaults to circa, but for some objects, like certain coins, you can change this to exactly because you'll know in which year it was minted. The ascribed culture field is used for objects in the early medieval period, where we're talking about specific cultures, in order to make it easier to search for the objects within the database. The 7 options are Anglo-Saxon, Anglo-Scandinavian, Carolingian, Frankish, Frisian, Viking and Irish. For all other periods, you shouldn't need to use this field. The next 2 fields relate to objects that have been reused or repurposed from their original function. For example, a Roman bracelet that's been made into a finger ring, or a potsherd that has been made into a spindle whorl. The object type you choose should be the final function of the object, so for the examples just listed, you would record them as a ring and a spindle whorl, because that's what they were last used as. With regard to the 2 fields highlighted here, the period of reuse field is a legacy field and is redundant now, so don't fill it in. In the evidence of reuse field, enter a brief note of how you know it has been reused. For example, a brooch that has been remade into a pendant might still have the catch plate on the reverse. Remember to include this information in the object description as well. The next part of the form is dedicated to the physical characteristics of your object, so size, weight and quantity. These fields are numeric, so don't enter the units as these are added automatically. You won't need to fill in every box, choose the fields most appropriate to your object. For example, for a coin you'd use diameter rather than length and width. Also, thickness doesn't need to be measured for coins unless they are unusually thin or thick. However, you must always fill in the weight field. If you're putting more than one object into a single record, which is generally only done for flint and pottery sherds, put the total weight in this field and the individual weights in your object description. Also, if the record does refer to more than one object, don't forget to record the quantity. There are often many different ways to take the dimensions, and for some objects there are standard ways to do this, so make sure you check first. Whichever way you choose to take the dimensions, make sure you tell us how you've done it in the description field. For cut pennies and farthings, don't try to work out the diameter, as the coin may not have been cut at its widest point. Instead, measure the cut sides and put them in the length and width fields. Remember to check your measurements carefully. Common mistakes are to enter measurements as centimetres or to put the decimal point in the wrong place. Next we move on to the manufacturing details, how the object was made and any decorative techniques used. The material field is a key field. There's space for 2 materials in this part of the form. If your item is made of 3 materials or more, put the 2 main ones here and add the others to the object description. The manufacture method field should only be used for coins, pottery and flint objects. For coins you have 3 options: cast, struck hammered and milled. For pottery you also have 3 options: handmade, wheel-made or cast. For flint you have 2 options: knapped, flaked or ground, polished. If a flint has clearly been knapped and then polished, use ground polished because this is the rarer and more interesting technique. For all other materials, enter information about manufacture into the object description. The surface treatment field refers to any materials applied to the surface of an object to decorate it, for example gilding or enamelling. There's a drop-down from which you can choose the appropriate treatment. If something has more than one type of treatment, for example it's both gilded and enamelled, then select multiple from the drop-down list and record the treatments in the object description field. Do not enter the surface treatment materials into the primary/secondary treatment fields. They only need to go here. Do not fill in the decorative styles field. It's much better to fully describe the decoration in the object description instead. The preservation field should be left blank as well. Again, it's better to describe this in the object description. The completeness field, however, must be filled in. It defaults to complete, so remember to change this if your object is substantially incomplete or is just a fragment. Use incomplete if more than half the object is present. Use fragment if less than half the object is present. With regard to recording components of an object, such as a buckle pin on its own, with no buckle, you apply the same logic. You are dealing with the buckle pin on its own as an object in its own right, so it's either complete, i.e. a whole undamaged buckle pin, or it's damaged, in which case you choose incomplete or fragment as described. In the same way, a cut farthing, if it isn't broken, is a complete cut farthing. If in doubt, ask your Fines Liaison Officer for guidance. The next set of fields relate to how and when the object was discovered. The fields that you get here will depend on whether you are a volunteer, a Fines Liaison Officer, or a self-recorder. That's a person who records their own fines onto the database. This is due to the need to safeguard confidential information under data protection regulations. For recording details, self-recorders will see only one field, the Recorded By field. This will autocomplete with their own name. Fines Liaison Officers have a further set of fields that detail who discovered the object and who identified it. This is because they are recording other people's fines. If you're a Fines Liaison Officer, there will be a drop-down list for each of these fields linked to our people database, so just select the right person from the list. The next set of fields cover how the object was discovered. The discovery circumstances field isn't often used, as most of the information can be placed into other fields, but sometimes the circumstances are out of the ordinary and the extra details can be recorded here. For example, we have a flint arrowhead on the database that was discovered when a mole pushed it out of a molehill. There's not an option for that in the drop-down list, surprisingly, so you can put the information here instead. The discovery method field defaults to metal detector, but if you click on the arrow, you'll get a drop-down list of other options, so just select the most appropriate. For an eyes-only find while detecting, use chance find while metal detecting. There are two boxes for discovery date because occasionally people don't remember precisely the date an object was found. So this allows you to input a date range between which it was found. If you know the precise day it was found, put the same date into both boxes. Don't leave one blank, as this will mess up the database searching. Simply click into the box and a calendar will come up from which you can select the correct date. If the object was found on a metal detecting rally, you'll need to complete the two fields shown here. First of all, tick the box to confirm it is a rally find. Then, from the drop-down list, select which rally it was found at. If the rally is not listed, ask your Fines Liaison Officer to add it to the list. The final set of fields relate to any particular reference numbers attached to the object. The other reference field is used if you have your own reference number for an object. A lot of finders do this to keep their collections organised. Or if there's something like a museum receipt number or similar. You must put an explanation of what the reference number means. For example, finder's reference number 123 or receipt number 123. The Sites and Monuments record number is now known as the Historic Environment Record or HER number. Use this field if your object has been uploaded on the local HER database. Check with your Fines Liaison Officer if you're not sure. The Museum Accession Number field should be used if your object has been acquired by a museum. It's an important field to complete because it helps us to demonstrate how much PAS material ends up in museums. The current location field is mainly used for fairly permanent situations, such as when it's been acquired by a museum. It's best not to use this field for very temporary locations, as it's very easy to forget to update it. Finally, the subsequent action field tells us what happened to the object after it was recorded. It defaults to return to finder, but if it was acquired by a museum or something similar, you'll need to select the appropriate option from the drop-down field. Most of the list refers to things connected to the treasure administration process, so you'll probably not need to use it. It's now time to save your record, so go ahead and click the blue button at the bottom of the page. If you get an error message mentioning tokens, just click Save Again until it works. It's just an occasional glitch the database experiences. You will not lose any data. If there is no error message, but your record still will not save, then it's because you have made a mistake or missed a key field somewhere. Scroll up until you find the problem. It will be helpfully highlighted in red text as shown here. Once you've amended the relevant field, you should be able to save the record. If you've referred to a book or article in your object record, which is very likely, then you'll need to complete the Bibliographic reference form, much like when you cite a reference in an essay. And in fact, we use the Harvard reference style for citing publications in database records. In the record pictured here, you can see that the recorder has mentioned a book or article by Egan and Pritchard. They now need to tell us what this book or article is, so that we can find it to look at ourselves, should we want to. To do this, open your saved record and scroll down to the bottom, where you'll find a blue button labelled Add a Reference. Clicking this button opens the Bibliographic reference form. The first detail to add is the author's name. If you start typing a surname into the box, you'll get a drop-down list. Scroll through until you find the correct author. Once you've chosen an author, a drop-down list will appear in the next box down, the publication title field. Scroll through the list to find the correct title. You can add relevant page numbers in the next box, as well as any additional reference numbers. If you cannot find the book or article that you want, please ask your Finds Liaison Officer, who can add it to the bibliographic database for you. Once you have completed all the necessary fields, click the blue Submit button to save your reference details. The information about an object's find spot is one of the most important parts of a database record. The find spot is what gives the finds their context, particularly for objects that have been moved out of their original context by ploughing. To access the Find Spot form, open your saved record and scroll down to the bottom to find the green Add a Find Spot button. All of the fields on the Find Spot form are key fields. Start with the county first. There's a drop-down list of all the current counties, unitary authorities or metropolitan districts, so pick the one you need from the list. Next is the European region. Again, there's a drop-down list to help you. This field is important because we often have to compile regional statistics for annual reports, for example. There are two further fields with drop-down lists for district and parish. These two fields are linked such that what you pick for district will dictate what options you then get for parish. If the right parish isn't in the list, you may have chosen the wrong district. The find spot to be known as is only used in exceptional circumstances, usually for finds that are treasure or come from a sensitive site such as a burial ground. You will not need to use this field unless your Finds Liaison Officer tells you to. The Also Known As field rarely needs to be completed. It's there for cases of very old finds or sites where the name may have changed over time. You will notice that the next couple of fields have red boxes around them. Information entered into a red box is protected and is not visible to the public due to its personal and confidential nature. The address and postcode fields are mostly relevant for finds discovered in a back garden or a similar property. If the find was discovered on a ploughed field and the field happens to have a name, you could put that here instead. Most of the time, however, the find will not have come from somewhere with a specific postal address, so you won't need to complete this field. Unless you are a finds liaison officer, the landowner field will not appear on your form. If you are a volunteer or self-recorder, you will need to ask your finds liaison officer to add the landowner's details once your record is complete. If you're a finds liaison officer, start typing the landowner's name into this field and you'll get a drop-down list of people. The next field, the grid reference box, is essential. You must enter a national grid reference number, which is normally 2 letters followed by a string of numbers. We ask for a 6-figure grid reference as a minimum, but most finders provide more accurate 8, 10 or even 12-figure grid references, which is fantastic. To protect the exact find spot, public users will only ever be able to see a 4-figure grid reference, which equates to the nearest kilometre. The grid reference certainty defaults to certain, which should be the case for most finds that have been discovered recently, particularly where a GPS unit has been used to take the grid reference. However, for some very old finds you may be less certain, in which case select one of the other options. You will need to explain why in the Findspot comments field a bit later on. The grid reference source field tells people how you found the grid reference. There's a drop-down list, so select the most appropriate option. The next 3 fields relate to the land on which the find was discovered. They are all drop-down lists, so relatively straightforward to complete. The first is the broad land use type, for example pasture, garden, cultivated land, etc. You can narrow these down further with the next field down, which is specific land use. The depth of discovery is a useful field to complete if you have the information. The Findspot comments section is divided into the Findspot description and Findspot comments. The Findspot description box is for any extra information about the Findspot that may be useful. For example, if a finder has names for the different fields they detect on, you could put that information here. But you must not put any confidential or sensitive information here, such as grid references or anything that would allow the precise find spot to be identified. The Findspot comments box is mainly used for comments on the reliability of the grid reference for the find if you've ticked probably or possibly. It's usually used to flag up old finds where the find spot has been lost or never recorded. New finds should all have find spots, otherwise they cannot be recorded. Again, do not put any sensitive or confidential information in this box and do not write anything defamatory. You're now ready to save the Findspot data. Scroll down and look for the blue button labelled Add a Findspot. If you've entered all of the information correctly, then you'll get a map like this one with the parish boundary highlighted, and your find will show as a little artefact symbol in the general area it was found. If this symbol is outside the boundary line, then you've either entered the wrong parish or the wrong grid reference, so you'll need to go back and check. Now you've added all the written information for your object, it's time to add an image. To add an image, open your saved record and look for the blue button labelled Add an Image in the top right corner of the screen. This will bring up the Add an Image form. On the new form, look for the blue button labelled Browse in the top left corner of the screen. Clicking the button will open your file browser and you'll be able to navigate through your files to find the correct image. Double-click the one you want. You'll see that the image has been uploaded to your queue. Repeat this process for all the images that you wish to attach. When you've selected all of the images that you want to use, click the blue button labelled Start Upload. Once the upload is complete, you'll need to add some metadata to the image. This sounds complicated, but it just means the information about an image. Click the long green button labelled Add Metadata to the images. The metadata appears to the right of the image. Most of it will have been completed automatically, but you will need to add an image label yourself. To do this, look for the small grey button labelled Edit, which is directly beneath the image. This will open the image metadata form. All of the image metadata fields must be completed. There is guidance about how to write the image label at the bottom of the image metadata screen. It's important that our images are labelled consistently. You will also need to select the county in which the find was discovered and what historical period it belongs to. The image copyright field is also important. You must tell people who the copyright holder is. For Finds Liaison Officers, this will either be the Portable Antiquities scheme or the organisation that hosts you. If you're recording your own finds, you can assign the copyright to the PAS or you can keep yourself as the copyright holder. Either is absolutely fine. You must then tell us what the copyright licence for the image is. All images on the database tend to use the Creative Commons CC BY licence, which means they can be used by anyone as long as they are properly credited. There's a drop-down list of options, so choose the one you'd like to use. Do not select All Rights Reserved, as this term is now obsolete. When you have finished, click the blue button labelled Upload Image. This will take you back to the main image screen. In order to return to your record, click the linked record number near the bottom of the screen. You're now ready for your record to be published. If you're a Finds Liaison Officer, you can publish your own record. If you are a volunteer or a self-recorder, you will need to get your Finds Liaison Officer to publish it for you. In your completed record, look for the blue button labelled Get this record checked or published by your flow. Simply choose your Finds Liaison Officer from the list and choose a reason for sending. This will usually be, "Can you publish this, please?" The Finds Liaison Officer will check your record and progress it through our workflow system. All records created on the database, regardless of by whom, pass through a three-stage workflow process to ensure the consistency, accuracy and quality of the records. The first stage is on review, which is denoted by a red flag. This is for unfinished records and shows that the record is still being worked on and is likely to change. Red flag records are not visible to the public. The second stage is awaiting validation and is denoted by an orange flag. This means that the record is finished and has been checked by a Finds Liaison Officer. Orange flag records are visible to the public and are perfectly fine to use for research. It just means they've not yet been seen by a Finds advisor. The final stage is published, which is denoted by a green flag. This means that it has been seen by a Finds advisor, who may have added extra information based on their field of expertise. All records, regardless of what stage they are at, can be edited, even the published green flag records. This means that records can be kept up to date as new information comes to light through research and allows us to keep our data relevant and accurate. If you notice a way in which a record could be improved, you can send us an error report. If you scroll down to the bottom of any database record, you will find a yellow button on the left-hand side labelled Report a Mistake. Clicking the button brings up a form where you can enter the details of the error, which will then be sent automatically to the Finds Liaison Officer responsible for the record. It's not just for reporting mistakes, but also if you have further information about a find or a type of find. For example, If you research a particular period or type of object, you may well have extra knowledge about a find that would be useful to include in the record. We don't mind getting error reports. It's a quick and easy way of making our records better for everyone. Okay, we're almost done. Hopefully you now understand the process of creating records on the PAS database. It may seem quite laborious at first, but with practice you'll become quicker. We recommend you stop the video here for now and have a go at creating some records by yourself in consultation with your Finds Liaison Officer, who will be able to provide support and advice. Once you're comfortable with the recording process, come back to this section of the video to learn about the copying data function, which is useful for when you have several objects of the same type or from the same Findspot to record. There are two places on the database where you can copy information from a previous record: when you're adding a new record and when you are adding a new Findspot. On both forms, there's a green button at the top on the right-hand side labelled Copy Last Record. Clicking this button will copy all of the relevant information from the previous record into a new record. So if you click it on the Add New Object form, it will copy all of the object information across, and if you click it on the Findspot form, it will copy all of the Findspot information over. This function is useful if you have a bag of finds from the same Findspot and you don't want to have to enter all of the Findspot information each time. Or if you have several objects of the same type and you don't want to enter things like the object type every time because it's the same for all of them. You must always check your new record thoroughly though, as it's very easy to also copy across information that doesn't apply to that particular object. For example, a common mistake is to copy across everything and then not amend the object description, which leads to features being described that are not on that object at all. So make sure you double check and delete anything that isn't relevant. You can personalise your Copy Last Record function so that only the fields you want to copy are copied across. This is useful to do and can help to avoid copying incorrect data into a record. To do this, you will need to go to your account details page. That's the page you get just after you've logged in. In the sidebar on the left-hand side under Database Settings, click on Configure Copy Fields. Click on the form you want to edit, either Finds or Findspots, and it will open a form containing several tick boxes. Simply tick the ones you want to copy and untick the ones you don't. It's best to keep most of them unticked to avoid unnecessary errors, but things like object type, description, periods and dates can be useful things to copy across to help save you a bit of time when recording. For example, you could group all of your finds into periods and do all the Roman, then all the medieval, and so on. Or you could group them into types and do all your coins, then your brooches, etc. You'll find what works best with a bit of practice. So there you go, a complete guide to recording objects onto the PAS database. There are several information sheets to accompany this video, so please ask your Finds Liaison Officer for further information. And don't forget to check out our Finds recording guides on the county pages.